Welcome to yet another episode of The Third Mic. Today we are exploring the theme History as a Lens, how understanding the past helps students navigate a complex world. So, now before you roll your eyes and think no more dead empires or boring dates, please stay with us, there is more. In a time when global events unfold rapidly and information moves faster than reflection, history offers something rare perspective. It is truly an honor to welcome our next guest, our beloved retired professor from the Department of ISPH at Christ University, Dr. Vagishwari SP, a teacher who has shaped generations of students to think critically about the past and its connection to the present. With over 3 decades of teaching and research, she joined Christ in 1989 and went on to serve as the head of the Department of ISPH. Her areas of specialization include history and visual aesthetics, historiography, IR, and Karnataka studies. She is a recipient of the Sahapedia UNESCO Fellowship and served as one of the principal investigators for the project by Oxford University England on native healing traditions. Today, as an independent researcher, she continues to inspire generations, so much so that even students from the batches of 1970s fondly refer to her as the goddess of history. Ma'am, we are deeply privileged to have you with us today and welcome to Third Mic.
Thank you very much, Vidya. It's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure to be back and talking to you. At the outset, let me express my thanks and my gratitude for wanting to talk to me and giving me this opportunity to exchange a lot of ideas that were there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We are so glad that you could join us today. So, I thought we could begin with something very fundamental. World history is one of the most important tools for today's college students to understand the world they are stepping into. But we often hear students say history feels so far away or disconnected from their lives. So, how do you respond to that perception, and how can students use historical thinking in everyday decision making?
Okay, there are two parts in your question. So let me start with the first, where students feel very disconnected with history. That could be, for a variety of reasons, multiple reasons. One of the major areas why students feel very disconnected is because there is, while learning history, whether they are taught history in a formal manner or whether they themselves go out and read about history, there is always a missing connect between what happened in the past to wherever they are located. So, as a result of this, students tend to look at the past as something that has happened and it needs to be there. They do not look at the links that are there that gradually come towards the present. The past gets stretched to the present. So, unless we map out these links, unless we map out these stretches that are there, obviously, any reader, whether it's a student, a formal student, or a reader in general, would feel very disconnected. So the basic issue is in terms of how do we approach the study of history itself. Okay, so that is one part. And then when you say how do students or how can historical thinking be used in everyday life, now there are a couple of issues that history talks to us very clearly. Now, the first and the most important thing is while looking at history, if one were to ask the question of what is happening, then history does not reveal itself and it becomes very redundant. Okay, instead of that, if we look at the why part of history, why is this happening? And history need not always be. There is a wrong perception that whatever happened in the past, and the past is the very definition of past is civilizational context. As in, for instance, for new nations like probably United States of America, the past is hardly 400 years, and for older civilizations like India or China or Africa, past can be thousands of years. So how do we quantify what is past? Now, the issue here is we tend to look at, so coming from the area, looking at the locational, situatedness of oneself. If one were to look at India, for example, and say, whatever happened 2000 years ago, how is it relevant? How is it going to help me deal with navigate my present life? Now, that need not always be the way we look at past. The past can also be what happened 20 years ago. Past can also be what happened. That could be our immediate past. Past can be what happened in my own life last year. Now, that's also past. So the term past need to be very clearly defined for us to make it relevant in our daily lives. Now, if that is taken into consideration, one thing that history teaches us is to constantly locate the data and the facts within a certain framework. So, which means even in our daily lives, we need to put all the facts that we are dealing with. It could be as simple as taking an admission into an institution, or applying for some positions, or even as simple as doing assignments. Or so the framework in which it can be done is what history teaches us. Because by itself, fact or data cannot be understood. It just remains a fact. It is a useless piece of information. But when it is brought into a framework of processes, how do I prepare for my exam is as historical as how did a certain war or an event take place.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That was, yeah.
One needs to look at various perspectives, sources. So these are all things. For instance, the way we look at history by building up sources is also the way one does an assignment by looking at various sources. So these are the foundational inquiries that should one should be looking at it. So if one looks at history as events alone, then it becomes highly irrelevant in one's everyday life. But if one looks at history as a process, then process is there whether in the past or in the present.
Yes, ma'am, that was really thoughtful, and I really liked what you said about and how you differentiated between reading history and experiencing history. And it makes me think about how we experience history outside textbooks. So I remember you showing us slides of all the places you have visited in our last year World History classroom, and me and my friend sitting in the backbench and being genuinely impressed and already planning our future world trips. So, since you're an avid reader and traveler, how have travel and books shaped your understanding of world history? When you travel, you get to see layers of history in real landscapes, ancient streets, old ports, blended cultures. So, do you think students should travel more intentionally? And how can travel act as a living classroom for history?
Okay, now let me start with kind of delineating what books does and what books do for us. Now, one of the things that we get out of books when you read a text is primarily it provides us the process that has happened. Texts always talk about process, just not events. It's not Texts need not always be descriptive in nature. So they kind of bring out those process, and in turn, it helps in critical thinking. It provides, most importantly, books always provide primary data rather than secondary data. It's a hardcore right from the oven. You are getting something.
Yes.
So the primary data is something that will always stay with you when you try and understand history, and that in a very large manner also overlaps into travel. Now, travel is primarily a sensory perception. A book or a reading or a text provides you with data, but it does not satiate you with experience. It pushes you into imagination. It pushes you into imagining what might have happened. How could it have happened? But travel constantly augments whatever you have read. So what happens is when one travels, one is looking at the lived-in experiences of the communities there. the past that they have inherited. And it also enables connecting the loops or the gaps that are there. For instance, students look at Colosseum, and students would have read a lot about Colosseum. But yet, the whole arrangement of Colosseum, when one visits Colosseum in Rome, the entire structure and the underground structure for the slaves, and then the animals for the fight, etc. Now that's a different take altogether. So constantly, books and travel, they overlap. Now, without books, travel becomes useless because one would not have read anything, no critical thinking. So when one goes to a place, all that one can do is see and either get impressed or not get impressed. So one needs to read before travel, and one needs to travel to really understand what has been read.
Okay, ma'am. And that was so beautiful and personally inspiring. And it also connects us to something slightly more structural. One major concern in academic circle is how colonialism shaped what we study. And how deeply do you think colonialism still influences our classrooms, our syllabus, and even the way history itself is narrated? And connected to that, how do you view the recent changes in Indian history, Indian school history textbooks, and the new education policy, and what kind of impact will this have on young students and their global understanding?
Okay, this was quite a lengthy question. So let me take up the first part. Now, when one looks at colonialism, it need not be just over India. One can look at colonialism wherever it has happened, and most of colonial trend that we are talking about in modern period, that's approximately starting from around 19th century onwards, has always been Euro driven, from Europe to across the world. So, one of the lasting impacts of colonialism has always been the linguistic medium through which thoughts are understood, the past is understood. So, wherever one goes, whether it can be Brazil or Argentina or India, the language of the colonizer is also the medium through which one understands the past. And
Yes.
that itself is a major impediment or a block. Now, why am I calling it as an impediment? Because most of us, when I say us, I'm not just meaning India, but most of the colonized territories, we have lost the ability to access our past in our own spoken word or written word. So constantly we are depending on translated texts and translated by the colonial writers or translated by writers who are trained in colonial systems and colonial epistemologies. So, as a result, we hardly know what might have been there. We only know what we are told that exists. So, that is the lingering effects of colonialism, and we have not been able to tackle with that at all. Then, the second problem with colonialism is we have we have gone into a mode where the eurocentric systems of knowledge, eurocentric systems of philosophies and thoughts are now considered as the only systems of knowledge and thoughts. For instance, if you look at STEM, science, technology, mathematics, engineering, the STEM board. Now, somehow the whole colonized world believes that this entire STEM knowledge has come to us because of colonialism. However, what one does not question or realize is that there could not have been civilizations, extremely complex civilizations with high technologies existing without the knowledge of mathematics or engineering or technology. How could they have constructed huge pyramids
Yes,
or
ma'am.
ziggurats or the Taj or the Brihadishwara or the Kailas temple at Ellora? I mean, they are examples of mathematical and engineering skills. However, colonialism has brought us into a sphere where we don't even think that these knowledge systems could have existed in our ancient or in our immediate past. So that kind of mistaken epistemic dangers is what we have to prolong. We have to face with colonial impact. So, having said that, the other issue with colonialism is also the lens with which we look at our own past. For instance, in India, uh, the system of caste or caste system as an institution, now it's extremely complex. It is not homogeneous. It's not a pan Indian uniform system. Rather, it is very, very decentralized tradition practices which are local. Not just one say when one says region, it does not mean a state as state in the present sense, but it's also in the within a state. For example, within Karnataka, caste is practiced or is followed in very many different ways. So the whole idea of caste based on four varnas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, which is a colonial contribution. Now that does not reflect the ground reality of how the varna and caste are different and the whole practices are different. How do we for instance, if one says the Brahmins are elite, then the issue of in Karnataka, along with Brahmins, they are Veerashaivas also, Lingayat community. They are also very elite. But in the colonial writing of caste, the Veerashaiva are not considered as elite. So there is a big gap between what is known as European driven or European, perspective of regional systems to what is actually being practiced in reality. So these are the effects of colonialism. And if I'm sorry, the second question was maybe I should write down the questions.
Okay.
Okay, you talked about how the NEP
Yes,
syllabus.
ma'am. Yes.
Okay, now this is something that we need to very seriously consider in two ways. One is NEP by itself is a provision and it's a revision that was widely needed. In the sense, education in India was always geared up towards university. We never had vocational training as a big part of our educational systems. So now the NEP has brought in 4 years of degree, and then it has gotten multiple entry and exit levels. So one can kind of enter and then exit with a certificate or a diploma second year, and then final they can exit with a degree certificate. Um, and then internship has been made mandatory throughout all levels of education. Plus, the government has declared that at least 6% of GDP will be now invested in education, whereas till now it's hardly 3.5% to 4% of GDP. So NEP has two divisions. One is the structural part of NEP, which is very seriously needed in this country. The other is the execution part. Now, the revision of textbooks that you were talking about is not a part of NEP, it's a part of political processes.
Yes.
Now, that is a very serious issue. And for a student of history, one can't adopt right and wrong approach, which is what the journalistic approach is. Okay, history does not teach us to kind of look at what is happening. History teaches us to look at why it is happening. So, if I were to say that removing certain portions within the history text is wrong, then I'm just parroting the journalistic reports, newspaper writings that is coming. So, how am I different from being a student of history? So, from historical, rootedness, when one looks at it, what one has to realize is history is not just a discipline or an epistemology. It also has a very heavy political leverage. So, regardless of which party is in power, regardless of which category of ideology is in power, constantly history gets played. So, as students of history, we need to realize this. Instead of being very vocal in condemning, we need to look at how history gets used by political establishment because of what history can offer. It offers legitimacy and justification. Okay, so When you look at, for instance, the 2002 riots have been removed and the Mughal period has been removed, okay, which is very, very wrong. I mean, we can't delete, we can't erase parts of our history. But then we also need to look at how previous years or previous decades, lot of things had not been included.
Yes.
For instance, the anti Sikh riots were never a part of the history textbook till 2005. The anti Sikh riots happened in 1984. So, till 2005, only after a lot of pressure over the government, the UPA government finally agreed to include it. And till today, for your information, the Naili massacre in Assam, during the All Assam Students Union movement in 1979, there was a very huge massacre in 1983 because the government of India was forcing elections, etc. And by even traditional estimates, government estimates say that around 3,000 people died in this massacre. And non state estimate says more than 5,000. A commission was set up, the Tiwari Commission was set up from 1984 till 2025. Neither the commission report was released nor was it made a part of history text. Only in 2025, last year, it was introduced in the Legislative Assembly of Assam. So, what I'm trying to say is one cannot feel very outraged that certain things have been left out because of the government's political concerns and ideology.
Okay.
As students of history, one needs to accept that it is an ongoing process. All parties in power will always try and use history to their best ability.
Okay. And that gives us a lot to sit with. So, if we step back a little, is there a danger in romanticizing the past while trying to learn from it? And how can students avoid nostalgia replacing analysis?
See, at certain points of time, nostalgia is what pushes an individual to preserving that past.
Okay.
If one looks at, I mean, our own lives, there is a nostalgic attachment to what perhaps our grandparents would have given us. So we tend to be more careful in using them. We tend to preserve
Yes.
because it has an emotional connect.
Okay.
So without nostalgia, the urge to conserve, the urge to preserve, the urge to pass it on to the next generation will never come. However, romanticizing is a byproduct of nostalgia.
Okay.
The more nostalgic I become, the more I start romanticizing
Romanticizing.
my past. Now, there is a very thin line, it's a very dangerous line. If I don't, if I'm not nostalgic about my past ceases to convey any meaning. It ceases to be any meaningful to me. It becomes meaningless. Something somewhere happened. Why am I connected? So I don't have the urge to conserve it. I don't have the urge to preserve it. And because there is no nostalgia, I don't consider it as mine. It's not mine. So how will future generations inherit this past? So one needs to be nostalgic. And one should also realize that romanticizing the past is a very dangerous offspin of this nostalgia. So being nostalgic is fine, but romanticization it kind of deprives an individual's critical thinking capacity. So one starts arguing that the whole past is nothing but absolutely benevolent, and that's a very dangerous trend. So there is no hard and fast rule to say how much of nostalgia can be allowed and where do we stop it. I mean, there is no rule there, but it is needed.
Okay. Okay, thank you, ma'am, for highlighting that balance. So, building on that, in your view, what are the three historical skills every student, regardless of their major, should develop before they graduate?
They need to understand that all thoughts, beliefs, emotions, events, ideas, systems of knowledge, they are all very relative. They are not absolute. Okay, they are always relative. How I understand hunger is different from how you would understand hunger. So it's
Yes.
relative. So a student before graduating should realize, and history teaches us this, because what is considered as highly advanced in one area is considered as a sign of backwardness and a very inferior culture in some other part of the world. So history teaches us the idea that all of these have to be, one has to be aware that these are all relative. So when one says something is highly developed, it's relative. Developed for whom? Defining it as developed by who? Okay, so that is one skill. And the other skill that a student of history has to understand is any data that comes towards us need to be analyzed first and then interpreted. Without analyzing, without interpreting, um, total understanding of a data is a very, very dangerous trend. Nothing can be looked at as given. So, analysis and interpretation. And the third, I would say, is a far more skill of thinking rationally. One needs to think rationally. These are three skills.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That feels deeply relevant, and which makes me curious. If you had to redesign a college history course for non history majors, what would you remove and what would you absolutely keep?
It depends on, this is something that I have always argued. And, um, we have been trying to do that in Christ University itself. Um, but then it needs to kind of pick up. Now, the first thing is all of us need history. Without history, one can't survive.
Yes.
I'm not saying this because I'm a student of history, but I'm saying this as a generic reader. And we need history. However, what category of history is needed for whom is very different. Suppose if I'm designing a syllabus for, let's say, a commerce class, a class which is doing commerce, banking, business, trade, etc. Then for them, a political history is not as useful as history of banking, history of trade. Okay. The other time you were asking me about colonialism, etc. Now we believe that the system of banking is something that has come to us from colonization. But even before that, for example, in India and I mean all over the world, there were indigenous ways of doing banking. We had in India we had trade guilds, and these guilds were were carrying out functions that a present day bank does. The guilds were related to profession. So there was a potter's guild, a weaver's guild, a goldsmith's guild. They would advance loans, give interest, and help professionals. So one would have a history of banking for a commerce student. So, syllabus has to be structured in the context of whom are we going to pass the syllabus to, the recipient. That is one. Second, what would I retain, regardless of the background of the class or the group that we are prescribing the syllabus to? There is a certain basic level of historical awareness that all of us need. So I may be a commerce or a science or a physics or a math student. There is a certain amount of basic level of historical understanding that we need. So history as a concept, and the theories in history. Now these would be a part of the syllabus that I would do. But I would also bring in, and this is a danger that happens only in ancient civilizations, old world civilizations like ours. Because for us, anything history has to be old. So we refuse to deal with contemporary, we refuse to engage with contemporary reality. So I would bring in food history
Okay.
or urban history, history of jewelry. because history of jewelry deals with it. It can be very historical in the sense from Harappan civilization right down to the present. The motifs that are used are colonial period, post-colonial period, modernist, the medium in which a jewel is made. So a lot of that. So these would be the kind of courses that I would design.
Okay, ma'am, that was beautifully answered. And I just wanted to highlight one point from your previous answer. You were talking about having this balanced approach towards the subjects and the facts and everything. So, last day I was talking about this interview to a classmate of mine, and he was telling you can never leave Vagishwari ma'am's class with by saying like she's biased towards this concept, she's biased towards this concept. You can never leave her class like that. So that sounded so you, and that sounded really interesting when you just, I just wanted to highlight that.
Oh, thank
So
you.
okay, thank you. And this leads us to our next question. If a student wants to start seeing the world historically, where should they begin? A book, a habit, or a way of observing the world?
It should definitely start with a book. And by default, the book will lead to habit and observation. As I said, if one were to travel without reading what that area has, or if without being aware of the historical processes that region would have witnessed, then the region does not speak to us. Suppose I visit a monument without knowing what, who, why that monument exists, and without understanding the political geography of that area, without understanding the topography. I just go there and gawk at the monument at most. The monument does not speak to me because I have not taken the trouble of looking at its history. So I need to kind of read. And that reading by default will lead us to a habit, observation. I mean, I would have read things. So the moment I go to a place, or if, as the moment one goes to that place, one starts looking around. People start looking around. And so a lot of other things will fall into one's, orbit. I was traveling once and suddenly I noticed the manhole covering, the drainage, underground drainage on the roads has manhole covering. I mean, you get that, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
The manhole. And I was in England. I was going through that. I mean, I was just walking on the street, and the manhole covering has the stamp of the Queen, the sovereign, and very picturesque, plus the year in which it was used. I mean, we don't have that. It's manhole covering is very functional.
Yes.
It's a utility object.
Yes, ma'am.
But then I started mapping around. So a lot of history got revealed through that. So yes, reading, and that will lead to observation and habit.
Okay, ma'am. And thanks, ma'am. And this leads us to our final question. This question is from one of your students, Vastav from 4MAIS. Vastav asks, how has history as a subject shaped your thoughts, beliefs, and opinions?
My thoughts, beliefs, history has shaped in making me understand that the why part of history is more important than the what part.
And
The moment I look at the why part, the context in which the process has happened emerges. And that by itself has disallowed me from taking positions.
okay.
And that has been a major takeaway for me. I'm not able to take positions because I am able to look at positions in the sense, um, somebody asked me, I mean, leftist historians, a lot of those kinds of conversations are going on. So I said, please understand that as much as extreme right is bad, extreme left is also bad.
Yes.
Okay. We don't trust extreme leftist historical interpretations that came from Soviet Union for a very long time. So ideological polarization extreme is not good. It's like the doctrine of the mean. Doctrine of the mean says that there are two extremes. Cowardice is one extreme point, and then brashness is another extreme point. Bravery is the mean between these two extreme points. So, what has history taught me is that all of our lived in experiences of the world past has to be understood in the context.
Okay. Thank you. And ma'am, with that, we come to a close to our conversation. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, and continuing to teach us even beyond classrooms.
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm extremely happy and grateful to the Department of ISPH, to the head of the department, Dr. Madhumati Deshpande, for coordinating. And thank you very much, Hridya, Arvind, and all the others on the podcast, helping me and then wanting to speak to me again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. And for the listeners, please do remember me and you are living in a world built upon by thousands of years of stories. The more you understand them, the better you understand your own. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.